Okay, hello again, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this webinar. This is Mike Tersini from Merchants Arena, and today I've got the great pleasure to be talking with you about how you can make a series of small, easy fixes to your website that will, when you add them all up, make it much more effective and get you better results for your business. So let's go ahead and get started. If you haven't been on one of my previous webinars, you're probably wondering who I am. My previous experience includes almost 20 years in retail management, running stores across Ontario. And since 1998, I've been an e-commerce entrepreneur running several successful web properties with distribution centers in East and West Toronto and now in the greater Sudbury area. We sell products online every day and all the time, and for the last several years I've been teaching video and web marketing in class and through online training portals. And I put these webinars on to really just to help small businesses gain the momentum they need to be successful with their marketing efforts. Now I work mostly, almost entirely with small businesses, and I work with them to leverage marketing and technology to achieve maximum results within their business. And one of the areas of expertise that we're in is in building top ranking lead generation websites, and we sell or lease these as well as producing a multitude of different websites for ourselves. So let's start off by answering the why. Like, why should your business bother with its website? And I want to address this question for a few reasons. First and foremost, small businesses are notorious for having sort of a set it and forget it type approach to their website. And that's sort of regrettable, but I kind of understand because most small businesses or SMBs, they're small and people are busy and they're strapped for cash. So the website gets kind of pushed to the bottom of their priorities. The second reason I want to address the why bother question is because of the rise of social media. And, with their rise, there's a false notion out there that these social networks, like Facebook in particular, have made websites basically obsolete and sort of unnecessary. And this just isn't true. Like, I'm going to kind of stick my neck out here a bit and say that I barely ever use Facebook except for the advertising tactics that I'll be sharing with you in an upcoming webinar, because I find that the return on investment is low using Facebook in the traditional sense for my type of business. But it really does depend on the type of business that you're in. So be wary of people who say, oh, you got to be on Facebook without knowing anything about your business. There's really so many different ways to market your business with other social media platforms that have better proven results than just Facebook. So while sites like Facebook and Twitter and Google Plus are great platforms, they're not replacements for a solid web presence that you own and control. Because a business's website is basically its foundation, all other internet marketing tactics are built upon that foundation. To continue with that metaphor, if you have a weak foundation, you compromise the integrity and effectiveness of your other marketing efforts. And lastly, there's two simple reasons to direct your small business's scarce resources to your website. One is really easy, and that's just to make small incremental changes that have a really big impact on your site's effectiveness. And two, the energy that you devote to your website pays significant dividends because so few of your competitors are really doing anything at all. Most small businesses have dusty, cobweb-filled websites. They haven't been updated since the day that they were launched. So it's easy to kind of stand out with just a little bit of effort. Okay, so that was sort of a long introduction, and thanks for bearing with me. Now let's get to the meat of the presentation, the stuff that you can do today to make your website better. And I've organized these tips into a few different categories. And we're going to start with the typography and design. Now, most of you will understand the need for good imagery and graphics and layout, but if we're talking about how to make small changes that produce the best impact, typography is probably the best place to start. Because here's the truth, most websites have terrible, and I mean like really terrible, typography, and that's no exaggeration. So why does typography matter? It matters because it profoundly affects how your prospects interact with your messaging. And what's more, because of how people read online, in these short fragmented bursts, your typography can determine how much of your message gets through to your audience. So to make sure that your content is as accessible and powerful as possible, you want to make sure that it's easy to scan so that people can get a clear idea of what you're communicating in just a brief glance. And here's the thing, as strange as it sounds, by making your copy scannable, you encourage more thorough reading. And seriously, like things like heading and subheadlines and bulleted lists and formatted text, they act as these hooks and barbs that draw the eye and channel people's attention to your content. Without these hooks and barbs on your page, your audience is apt to just like glossy glaze over your text and click away. Another surefire way to boost the impact of your messaging is to make it easier to read. What a concept, right? It's funny that something so simple is so rare on the web. Even great designers overlook this part by not changing font size. To improve the readability of your web page copy, make sure that your font size is no smaller than 14 pixels. Also, make sure that you have adequate white space between the lines of the text. Because if you don't have enough, readers get eye fatigue and they'll lose focus and they stop absorbing your message. If you're not sure what specs your type should be, you should check out this really cool tool called the Golden Typography Calculator, and it'll help you find the optimal settings from an aesthetics and readability point for your text. And again, here's an image to reinforce the importance of having optimized font sizing and line height, the white space which is between the lines of your text. Okay, so more typography tips. 2 important ones. 1, don't use more than 2 fonts for your body copy. Any more than 2 and your page starts to look kind of cluttered and fragmented, which will torpedo reader engagement. 2, use common fonts for your website. Although, browsers are getting a lot better at rendering fancy typefaces, you never know what kind of browser your customers are using. They're probably using, an old outdated version of Internet Explorer. So you need to choose your fonts with a universal accessibility in mind and stick to common colors. Okay, one last small but important typography tip. Don't use underlines to emphasize words. In the language of the web, underlines denote hyperlinks. So don't add underlines to words unless you want to use it as a link or have users think that it's a link. Best to use a bold if you want to accent something. Okay, moving on, let's take a look for a few moments about how some of the simplest and most important design tips will have the largest impact in terms of your website's overall effectiveness. And also, don't worry, we're going to start moving a little quicker through these tips so that you can all get back to your busy schedules. So first, number 1, include your name and logo on every page and make the logo a link to your homepage. And this has become very standard operating procedures in web design, and that in itself is a good reason to do the same. And I'm going to explain that in the next slide. Number 2, use a consistent navigational structure throughout your website, and this will improve the usability and ensure that visitors can browse your site without getting lost or frustrated. And here's a good example of a website that follows both of these best practices, having a consistent navigational structure and a logo on every page. Okay, everybody, this slide is very important. As a general rule, it's best to keep your website design close to the standard for your industry, and don't reinvent the wheel. Okay, anything that fringes on what people are used to will be much more successful than trying to reinvent something. The concept was popularized by usability pioneer Jacob Nielsen, and he said, users form expectations for your site based on what's commonly done on most other sites. And if you deviate, your site will be harder to use and users will leave. And I'm not saying that your website shouldn't, be remarkable, but it should be remarkable for its messaging and for its polish and for its usefulness, but not for its novelty, because on the web novelty is kind of taxing, and the last thing you want to do is tax your audience. Okay, next is photography, and photography is so important. Okay, the web is, after all, a visual medium, but you look around, you don't see really businesses taking advantage of the huge canvas that they're giving to showcase their products, services, or their company. The good news for you then is that even small improvements to the quality of your imagery will dramatically improve your websites relative to your competition. To that end, 2 simple steps for improving your imagery. Don't use distorted or grainy photos. And whenever possible, avoid using stock photography whenever possible. And the reason for this is stock photos, which, they're typically glossy and sort of impersonal, they kind of dilute the key advantages that small businesses have over large businesses, which is, your authenticity and your personality. And taking great photos is really easier than it's ever been. Seriously, if you have a smartphone, you can snap tons of cool images in like minutes. Here's a great example of the power of photography. The picture really entices the viewer. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about changes you can make to your site content to make it more productive as a contributor to your bottom line. The first tip on this page comes directly from, again, Jacob Nielsen, the usability expert I mentioned earlier. You want to put your company tagline next to your logo on every page of your site. And this simple change can work wonders in terms of clarifying your value proposition, which brings clarity to your visitors on whether or not you can solve their problem. Anytime you can bring clarity to your prospects, it's a huge win for your website. And secondly, you should definitely have a bold, as in like bold and persuasive, headline on your homepage that welcomes visitors and tells them exactly what you sell and how it can help them. It's crazy how many businesses really neglect this basic element. If this tip sounds, blindingly obvious, and you already have a benefit-focused headline on your homepage, give yourself a pat on the back. You're in the small elite group. So here's an example of what I'm talking about here. Okay, so earlier we talked about how the typography impacts how people interact with your content. Now let's talk about other ways to improve your messaging and make it easy for prospects to get answers to their questions and understand what your pitch is. One is to use short, simple, to the point sentences. And 2 is to avoid long paragraphs. People read differently on the web. They're kind of goal driven. They want what they're looking for. You don't have to put large chunks of text on the page. People don't have the patience to wade through really long paragraphs. So here's a tip for reaching these impatient visitors. When you're writing or editing your content, regularly ask yourself this question: would a 9-year-old understand what I'm talking about? And one of the best things that you can do is, if you have a 9 or 10-year-old, have them read your site. And if they have difficulty reading through your site, you might want to edit your text. So you want to make sure that the answer is yes, and this will be challenging. It's all easy to let the words pour out in your certain language, which might be a higher tech language, or to throw around like industry jargon and fancy puffed up terminology. But simplifying your message and boiling it down to the essentials is the best way to make sure that your pitch not only gets through to your audience, but also stays planted in the reader's mind. Okay, you also want to make sure that your site has calls to action. So here's another tip that perhaps a few of you will think is too obvious, but I see countless websites that ignore this basic marketing principle. The fact is, no one's getting into your sales funnel unless you show them where it is. And that means making sure that your website has prominent and clear calls to action that appeal to your audience's interest. And depending on what you sell, you may need to include calls to action for varying levels of commitment. Like, for example, if you sell a complex big ticket product or service, some of your calls to action might be to download a free report, or watch a video, or subscribe to a newsletter. And if your products have price points you want to sell off the website, you better paint your website with buy now and add to cart buttons. So the larger point is this: your visitors should know exactly what they should do when they arrive at your site. And here's a good example of a good call to action. And notice the visual emphasis. Okay, the bottom button is almost more predominant than the logo, and the actual call to action is specific and benefit driven. All right, moving right along. As I mentioned earlier, your website is the foundation of your larger online presence, and it's a great idea to leverage it to drive engagement with other parts of your online portfolio, like your social media pages and your blog. And secondly, this is one very important thing to think about is to consider publishing a regular e-newsletter and adding a sign-up form to your website. I could give you an entire webinar on the value of getting people to sign up or on newsletters, but for now I'll just quote my favorite usability guy, Jacob Nielsen again. If you don't have a newsletter, then publishing one is probably the single highest ROI action you can take to improve your internet presence. So this is another tip to file under the make things easier for your readers category, and that is the inverted pyramid structure. It's the most effective way to tell a story when you know your audience may not stick around until the end. It means getting to the overall point as quickly as you can, and only then really adding more detail as you progress. The inverted pyramid structure guarantees that your readers will take away the key points even if they only read the first 30 words of your copy. And another tip that seems minor at first glance but can be really effective. As I said earlier, small businesses have a huge advantage over their larger competitors. They have character and they have personality. So putting photos of your employees and, even if it's just you and your dog on your About Us page is a great way to capitalize on this strength of personalization. Okay, more on the About page. And this is a very important page, and it's probably the most powerful one on your site. So it's a great idea to squeeze as much from it as possible. To that end, be sure to include any calls to action, such as a newsletter opt-in form, on your About Us page. It is in fact one of the most visited pages on websites. Okay, our next category of improvements, we're going to talk about how to make your site more user-friendly, and we'll start with the most basic principle. The bedrock principle of usability is this: give users what they want, make life easy for them, and this means taking the time to identify their goals when they arrive at your site, and then shaping your content accordingly. And part of this effort will be sort of intuitive. Maybe you look at your analytics and notice that your contact page is far and away the most visited page on your site, in which case you might consider placing your contact information right on the home page to save visitors time. And actually, I recommend doing that anyway, regardless. Another approach is to conduct some interviews with your prospects and current customers and get their input on the usability of your website. The point is, your website will better serve your own goals if you place them second to your visitors' goals. I can't, tell you how many times and how many of these minor arguments I've had with website owners who design their site for themselves and are hard pressed to make changes necessary to give their viewers like a way better experience. Okay, so here's another small tweak that will help your visitors a lot. Make sure that you let your users know where they've been by using colors to distinguish visited links from unvisited ones. And this sounds sort of like a small thing, but from a usability standard, it's much easier for people to navigate if they know which links they've already clicked on. So it's a good idea nonetheless. Okay, so we've already covered this idea, but I want to stress it a little bit further. And for some reason, people feel like they can only put the contact info on their contact page. And it's my belief that you should make it as easy as possible for prospects and customers to get in touch with you. The most straightforward way to do this is to put your phone number on the top of every single page. And here's a good example of what I'm talking about. This site makes it very easy for visitors to contact them. Have you ever been on a site where you have to fish around to find the contact information? And here's a little personal pet peeve of mine. If you have a crappy search function on your website, just get rid of it. Okay, there's nothing more frustrating for users who can't find what they're looking for is to use a search feature that doesn't deliver any good results. So unless you've embedded like Google custom search on your site, the chances are pretty good that your search feature is kind of lacking, and I suggest like ditching it. So that is especially if your site isn't very big. And here's another tip that I'm sure all of you will understand and agree with. Limit your use of PDFs. User studies have shown that people really don't like toggling back and forth between a normal web page and a PDF document. It kind of breaks their flow and it makes them more likely to leave your site. And some best practices. Fortunately, the use of Flash has diminished, and businesses are less apt to use Flash landing pages as the home page. But there are still some offenders out there. Except in rare cases, Flash will probably just add visual clutter and distraction to your pages, so I suggest getting rid of that. Another suggestion, if you operate a bricks and mortar type business, embed a Google map on your contact page, and this will make it easier for your websites to get driving directions to your store. Also, employing some basic SEO tactics or search engine optimization tactics will help your search gain prominence in the search engines. And these are pretty easy to execute, and they go a long way towards improving your ranking in the almighty Google. The first is make sure that you have accurate meta description and title tags for each page on your site. And that is the description tags and title tags. These are the chunks of text that display in the search engine results. So, keep in mind that they have to appeal to humans and not just, search engine algorithms. Second way to get more search engine visibility is to regularly update your site with high value content that your customers can use, and blogs are very effective for doing this. And I just want to talk to you briefly about the actual structure of your website. And I am going to be covering this in more depth and detail in an upcoming webinar called Learn the Correct Website Structure for SEO Success. But I think it's worth mentioning here, and this is just for a basic site, but it does become more involved for larger sites. But as I said, I'll be covering that in an upcoming webinar. There used to be a time when using keywords on a page, it was important to know what the keyword density was within your page, and this has become less and less important. What is important is that that you push page rank from your internal pages to your to the pages that you want, if that's your home page or sub pages, and you do that by really simply putting links to your home page using anchor text or the URL, and those links point back to your home page. So I'm going to give you an example here for this computer repair. If the home page is at the top, and we have one page that has a link that says Tampa Computer Repair, and that is a hyperlink to the home page. On some pages we might use a variation like where it just says click here for more information, where that would point to your home page. And you really want to mix up your anchor text. The anchor text is the text that you use for that link, and not always use the same anchor text. You want to variate it so it looks much more natural this way, right? As opposed to keyword stuffing and trying to use the same keyword all the time to use those in your links. That is the same situation for outgoing links, for links that are from outside of your website that point to your website. You want to variate that by sometimes using click here or more information, and then that link would in turn link back to your home page. And on another page here on the left, you have computer repair experts, and that again links to the home page. On another page, you perhaps have mobile computer repair, and then at on another page, the actual URL. So printed right out, and another link called PC repair. So just mix it up and try and variate that. It looks much more natural, and it works in providing more authority to your homepage, which is where you want people to land in the first place. Okay, next tip is having terms and disclosures on your site is so important. Okay, you are providing the search engines with the fact that you are a professional company, and we have found time and time again that the very first pages that get indexed by search engines like Google and Bing are these term pages, and then secondary is like the home page. So it's really important. These search engines are literally looking for them first, and in almost every case, they are indexed first. Okay, and here are some parting tips. One is make sure that your site loads fast. And for one thing, people are impatient. Every second counts on the web. And second, your page load time impacts your SEO. So you get better rankings if your page loads faster. So make sure that you have a fast loading site. And number two is if you run a retail or service business that gets a fair amount of mobile traffic, it's a really good idea to create a mobile optimized version of your website so that people who access it via a smartphone or tablet web browser have a good experience and can find what they're looking for. Many business owners don't do this, and it's a proven fact that people will navigate away from a site that they can't read on their smartphone. Okay, everybody, we made it to the end here. That is the end of the presentation. I hope that this has been helpful, and I really appreciate the time that you took out of your busy schedule to be here with me today. Please take what you've learned and apply just one thing today and one thing tomorrow, and in no time your website will be, a much bigger asset for your business. I guarantee you it'll be worth your time. And so now we're going to open this up to questions.